Instructional design really is the foundation of effective training. It helps us align learning experiences with the actual needs of the child welfare workforce.
That means designing training environments where vulnerability is met with support and not judgment. When we design with empathy and collaboration in mind, we're not just building better training, we're also supporting the well-being and effectiveness of the workforce. Self-care is not just encouraged, it's essential.
I'm your host, Kristina Finch. In this episode, we're taking a closer look at instructional design in child welfare training. We will explore why instructional design matters, how training is shaped by the way people learn, and what type of innovations are on the horizon. Today, I'm joined by 3 colleagues who are helping to design future training programs for Florida's child welfare system. Samantha Schoenberger serves our institute as Assistant Director of Professional Development. She has developed and led training opportunities at Florida State University for more than 10 years. Tennille Taylor is a learning facilitator for our Mireline program, which provides free online courses that help child welfare professionals use evidence-based best practices on the job. She has over 15 years of child welfare experience. And Dr. Lyndi Bradley is the Director of Professional Development at FSU's Institute for Trauma and Resilience Studies. She has a doctoral degree in educational leadership and policy, and her research interests include trauma-informed care, resilience, and prevention of domestic violence. Thanks, everybody, for being here today.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks for having us.
So, Sam, let's start with the big picture. Why does instructional design matter in child welfare training?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. Instructional design really is the foundation of effective training. It helps us align learning experiences with the actual needs of the child welfare workforce. And while a lot of people think it's just about e-learning or tech tools, it's much more than that. At its core, instructional design bridges the gap between what professionals need to know and how they learn best. In child welfare, that's critical because the work is complex, emotionally demanding, and often unpredictable. At the Institute, we're not just delivering content. We're designing learning that shapes behavior, supports sound decision-making, and most importantly, ensures transfer of skill. That means we're focused on helping professionals take what they learn in training and actually apply it in the field, in real situations with real families. That's where the impact happens. We use the ADDIE model. So that's analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. To guide our process, it's a cycle that keeps us moving and improving and adapting our training to meet the evolving needs of the workforce.
That idea of, connecting the training with the field, right? Like this idea of we have to know that this field is at times in crisis, right? At times they've got a lot of information coming to them at all moments. And so really taking a strategic approach to how you design this massive information that they're going to take in, I think is incredibly important. And I think along those lines, I want to move to Tennille and ask you from your perspective as a facilitator, how does good instructional design show up in the learner's experience and what makes a training feel well designed?
So when a training's well designed, it's just going to make sense. The learners are going to be able to follow along and understand why each part matters. The content's going to feel like it connects with what they do every day in child welfare, and it's going to connect that theory to practice. There's going to be clear instructions to help cut down on confusion and information overload. People are going to stay engaged because they're going to be invited to interact and reflect in meaningful ways.
I appreciate that because there's nothing worse, I think, than you're already in a crazy busy day and then you go and have to do a training or you volunteer to do a training and it doesn't hit. It doesn't make the impact that was intended. And unfortunately, then it could feel like a waste of time. But from what I hear from you guys, you're trying to be intentional about how you deliver this information so that it makes the most impact for the time that people are investing in this. I want to move over and talk to Lyndi because you come from a trauma-informed and resilience-based background, which, let's be honest, is needed in this field when working with these workers that see what they see on a daily basis. How does that lens influence how you think about instructional design, especially in the emotionally complex work of child welfare?
Yeah, so coming from a trauma informed and resilience based background, this really shapes how we approach instructional design with our team, especially with child welfare, like you said, where emotional stakes are high and the work is deeply personal. One of the first things that comes to mind is focusing on psychological safety. So, if we want learners to engage meaningfully, especially around sensitive topics like trauma or intimate partner violence, they need to feel safe. It's not just about feeling physically safe, but also emotionally and cognitively. That means designing training environments where vulnerability is met with support and not judgment. One way we actively promote psychological safety is by acknowledging the emotional weight of the material right from the start. We begin each training with a message about potential triggers and a reminder that self care is not just encouraged, it's essential.
I really appreciate that. I've gone through some of our courses that ITRS has helped us build, and I consider myself a pretty tough person. Yet definitely appreciate this idea of setting the stage before we get in there. It really shows how thoughtful the instructional designers have approached these concepts. And it reminds me, as maybe not a direct service provider, but it reminds me as a person working in the child welfare field that I need to take care of myself, that this is important, right? It's okay to say this is tough stuff and we need to set a tone before we move on. So thank you. It's clear that effective design is about more than just content from what I've heard from all of you. It's about the experience. So let's talk about what that looks like in practice. Sam, you often talk about a learning ecosystem. This is something you've said multiple times to me, and I'm fascinated by the idea, so I want to explore it a little bit here. How do you integrate e-learning with other modalities like coaching, communities of practice, or simulations so that it feels seamless and sustainable?
Yeah, so absolutely. And I love this question because it gets to the heart of how we think about learning at the Institute. As I mentioned earlier, we don't just create e learning. I actually have two learning experience designers on my team because we see learning as a journey, not a one time event. That's why we design experiences that live within a broader ecosystem, one that includes e learning, live facilitation, coaching, peer support, simulations, and increasingly AI enhanced tools. For example, we might introduce a concept through a short online course or microlearning, then reinforce it through a simulation where Tennille leads a debrief and reflection. After that, we support continued practice through applied coaching sessions. The key is alignment. Using consistent language, frameworks, and goals across all modalities so professionals can build on what they've learned no matter the format. That's what makes learning feel seamless and sustainable. We also think carefully about how the technologies we use interact. They need to be symbiotic, not siloed. It's not just about how my program fits into the ecosystem, but how the professionals move across the entire growth center landscape throughout their education and career. One area we're really leaning into is peer networking. We're exploring more ways to support knowledge transfer between professionals themselves because sometimes the most powerful learning happens in conversations, not just instruction.
I might be partial to instructional design just because that's where I got my master's degree in. But I've always thought that when you bring an instructional design perspective to almost any project, you really think in that, I think you put it as a symbiotic type of way where you're not just considering how that one e-learning is going to hit, but how does it fit into this whole cycle, this whole system of offerings that we're doing at the Grow Center. I know that I'm excited because I see it every single day that we're no longer siloing our interventions. Really, they're coexisting together in this space. And so we're providing holistic support to the worker rather than here's this training, see you later. Here's this training, now here's this, and now here's this, right? So it's this idea of we're all working together. And Tennille, I'm interested again because you're a facilitator, which is very different. When people think of instructional design, they typically think of e-learning, but you really are doing in-person facilitation a lot. And so What have you found that helps learners make the connections when they're in the classroom between what they learn online and then how they're applying it on the job?
So there's multiple tools I try to use when I'm bridging that gap between theory and practice. I use reflection prompts because they give learners a chance to think about how the material applies to their work. I can use discussion boards to help build a sense of community and reinforce what's being taught. There's practice tools like job aids and downloadable materials can be used to help learners practice. Modeling trauma-informed practices also allows the learners to utilize what they're learning in practice.
I get that. One of the things that I thought about when you said this was I think you said something like it makes sure that it's made for everyone, right? That everybody's thought of in this. And the reality is, we want child welfare workers thinking about accessibility, thinking about inclusion. That's incredibly important as a parallel process when working with children and families. And so we're pretty intentional about making sure that our courses that everyone can get something out of them, that everyone understands what they're coming across. And so, Lyndi, I imagine, and as someone that has worked on developing a lot of our learning tools, I imagine that alignment also depends on accessibility and inclusivity. How do you ensure that our courses are designed to reach all learners, regardless of their background or preferred learning style?
Right. So, accessibility and inclusivity are foundational to how we design learning experiences. We know that the child welfare workforce is incredibly diverse, not just in background, but in how people learn, process information, and engage with content. We lean heavily on the Universal Design for Learning, or UDL principles, to guide our approaches. That means offering multiple ways for learners to access the information, whether that's through visuals, audios, or interactive activities. It also means giving people choices in how they demonstrate their understanding, which helps honor different strengths and preferences. We also focus on clear structure. When training is well organized and predictable, it reduces the cognitive load and helps learners feel more confident in navigating the material. That's especially important when the content is emotionally charged or complex, which most of ours is.
That idea of meeting people where they are connects pretty perfectly to the next part of our conversation, how we actually keep learners engaged, especially in these virtual settings. We've talked about the design, we've talked about intentionality, and now I want to talk about engagement. Tennille, I'm turning it back to you. At times, you work directly with learners online, a lot of them. That can be hard to keep people engaged. But what strategies do you use to foster real connection and participation, especially from those people that might be reluctant at first?
Ooh, this is a good question. Because there's different comfort levels with folks who are online, I really start by trying to create a warm and welcoming space. I try to greet people, give them shout outs, and really try to make them feel comfortable with speaking in front of other folks. I try to create low pressure activities like polls or a quick check in to help ease people into conversation. I encourage a lot of peer sharing because it's going to build trust and it helps folks feel more comfortable. I also make space for silence and reflection because it gives people time to process and engage more deeply.
I appreciate that. But it also made me think what you said about letting people choose how they want to interact. I think that lends itself really to this idea of emotional safety. And Lyndi, engagement is also about emotional safety and relevance. How do you design learning experiences that help learners stay present, especially when that content touches on difficult or maybe even personal topics for some folks?
When we're designing learning experiences in child welfare, emotional safety is just as important as intellectual engagement, as we've already talked about, especially when the content is deeply personal. One of the ways we approach this is through trauma-informed facilitation. That means being intentional in how we introduce sensitive topics, offering content warnings when needed, and making it clear that learners have autonomy in how they participate. We also think carefully about pacing. If we move too quickly through emotionally heavy material, we risk overwhelming people. So we build in time for guided reflection and other types of engagement like journaling prompts or interactive activities that allow learners to process at their own pace. It really is just about creating spaces where learners can process what they are hearing in a way that feels manageable for them.
I can appreciate that. And so, Sam, from a design perspective, how do you collect and act on feedback to make sure that we're doing all of these things and that the course stays relevant and we continue to improve it?
Yeah, feedback is absolutely foundational to our design process. In fact, the E in the ADDIE model stands for evaluate, and we take that seriously. As a research institute, everything we create is evaluated, not just once to check a box, but through ongoing cycles that help us continuously improve. We gather feedback in multiple ways: learner surveys and interviews, facilitator input, and analytics from our learning platform. We also conduct user testing before launching new learning assets to make sure they're intuitive, engaging, and actually meet the needs of the workforce. But it doesn't stop there. We revisit content regularly. Actually, Lyndi knows that process very well because she does a lot of the work for those course maintenance cycles for our content created by ITRS. And so we update examples, refine activities, and respond to emerging needs in the field. It's really a continuous improvement mindset. It's what keeps our training relevant and responsive. Right now, we're actually in the middle of a major course maintenance cycle for 6 of our learning on demand courses. We're reviewing everything from content accuracy to user experience to make sure they're as strong as they can be before we release them in the FICWA Learning Portal.
I absolutely love that. I've been in training for over 15 years, and I think what I've learned is it's essential to stop and reflect on what we've put out there, what we've done, to make sure that we stay in tune with what's really needed. I don't think that happens as often as it should. And I know that the Institute is very intentional about that. And I appreciate you mentioning how we are a research institute at the end of the day. And so everything that we do, we're going to evaluate. And those outcomes, they may not be what we intended. They may not be all positive, and that's okay because we can always regroup. We can have those course maintenance cycles where we say, that wasn't really hitting. How can we make it better? So I appreciate that. And I think it's super exciting to see how design and facilitation and emotional awareness are all intersecting to make learning meaningful. So let's wrap up with what's next for the field. As we look ahead, innovation is a big part of this season's theme. So, Sam, what innovations in instructional design do you think will shape the future of child welfare training?
I'm really excited about where things are headed, especially with AI assisted design and adaptive learning. These tools are opening up new possibilities for personalization. We can now tailor training to a learner's role, experience level, or even emotional readiness, which is huge in a field as nuanced as child welfare. Simulations are also evolving rapidly. They're becoming more immersive and realistic, which helps professionals practice complex skills in a safe, supportive environment. And microlearning, those short, focused bursts of content, is helping people learn in the flow of work, which is critical when time is limited and the pace is fast. From a design perspective, what excites me most is our growing ability to rapidly respond to workforce needs. We may not be able to spin up a full VR simulation overnight, but we can use AI tools within a micro-learning framework to create virtual skill-building experiences that are timely and relevant. We're also thinking about how these innovations fit into the broader learning ecosystem, making sure they're not just flashy add-ons, but integrated tools that support long-term growth, peer learning, and real-world application.
I appreciate that. There was a time, I think, where people would not connect AI and VR and these innovation tools with the field of child welfare. And I think what we've done at the Institute is really leverage these technology tools to say, we need to keep up with the times. I once heard someone say, the AI wave is coming. You could sink or you could learn how to surf. And I feel like we're surfing. We're doing a pretty good job here at leveraging technology to help us create these amazing learning experiences. Tennille, how do you see the role of facilitators evolving as we integrate more technology and virtual learning tools?
I think it's about finding the right balance. We're using more technology to help us streamline our learning tools, but we're also keeping the human connection front and center. We're going to need to personalize training more based on what each learner needs, and we can do that through data and analytics to help us fine tune our training and make it more effective. As you were saying, I think the role is shifting, and it's not just content delivery anymore, but it's really about curating a learning experience.
I love that you said human centered. In the previous episode, I was talking to some of our colleagues about virtual reality, and I think we were emphasizing that the tool is incredible, but the tool shouldn't be the sole focus. You still have to have that human component. We still have to have that critical thinking from an actual person and not a machine. And so, although you're using these tools to really increase engagement, you're still the human in the room that we need, right? Facilitating this learning. That's critical. Lyndi, what advice would you give to other organizations or institutes looking to strengthen their instructional design practices, especially those working in this emotionally demanding field?
So, first and foremost, I'm a social worker. So, the biggest piece of advice is to always start with empathy. Instructional design is not just about delivering information, but it's about understanding the emotional landscape, like we've talked about, of the people doing the everyday on the ground work. In child welfare, that means recognizing the stress, the vicarious trauma, and the deep commitment that these professionals are bringing to their roles. I also encourage organizations to co-design with learners. The people closest to the work often have the clearest insights into what training needs to feel relevant and supportive, whether it's through feedback loops, pilot testing, or collaborative content development. Involving learners in the process leads to more meaningful outcomes. When we design with empathy and collaboration in mind, we're not just building better training, we're also supporting the well-being and effectiveness of the workforce.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate you bringing up empathy. I appreciate this idea of keeping that front and center when you're designing these products. Most of the time we focus on content, delivery, and not how it's going to be received. I think that's just comes naturally with trying to achieve things, trying to get things done. And so continuing to remind yourself, like, how is this going to be received by that individual in that space is incredibly important. And you really did hit it when you said co-design will help us do that, right? I think that is essential. So again, I want to thank all of you, Sam, Tennille, Lyndi, for such an insightful conversation. I said it before and I'll say it again. I love talking about instructional design. It's clear that this isn't just about how we teach, but how we care for the workforce through learning experiences and how you're creating those. I'd like to thank our guests for sharing their knowledge and insights with us. If you're interested in learning more about this episode and our guests, please visit our website at www.ficw.fsu.edu. You can also follow the Institute on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at FSU Child Welfare. Thank you to our Director of Communications, Emily Joyce, our producers, David Heller, Brantley Jones, and Alina Bachman, and our audio engineer and editor, Izzy Kring. Finally, thanks to all of you for tuning in. I'm Kristina Finch for the Florida Institute for Child Welfare.